Hi, friends. Hello from Fairbanks, Alaska, where yesterday was the first day a kindergartner named Knox saw the very first opening of a birch bud. And so things are starting. It's like the promise of winter being over is here. So we're excited to share with you today a project that Lisa, I think that you issued a Dear Colleagues letter right when I was finishing up my my postdoc, and this was my very first NSF grant that I was the lead author on. So thanks for helping me grow up, Lisa and Elena. Thanks for helping me grow up as a researcher. Elena was like, you could write your own proposal. And so this is the project that we're presenting today. And we lovingly call it Winterberry, which is a study of the changes in the fall, winter, and spring that our berries are facing here in Alaska due to changing timing of the seasons. So Elena. She's frozen with a beautiful smile on her face. All right, so I'll keep going until she unfreezes, because like Fairbanks, Alaska, it's a long process to unfreeze. We just wanted to give a shout out to all of the volunteers and stipend receiving people who have worked on this project. There was over 1,500 people across the state of Alaska who have been a part of this project. And in this project, we had some amazing collaborators, including Dr. Krista Mulder, who was one of the co-PIs with us, and a wonderful crew of informal educators, K-12, retired K-12 teachers, people from School of Ed, Cooperative Extension, Association of Interior Native Educators. All these people have made this a really great program and beyond what we imagined possible. So I don't want to steal all Elena's thunder because she got knocked off, but so she was going to explain. So Elena has been working in the field of community and citizen science. And we know that the term citizen science is hotly debated across the United States and the globe. And we think of citizen science as this spectrum of public engagement in scientific research. Everything from co-created projects all the way to contractual and contributory projects. And I'll show you the spectrum of these projects later. But Elena, since, early 1990s, I was in kindergarten, and Elena Sparrow gave me a Woman in Science Award. So like, that's how long Elena's been. She told me, I was in kindergarten, she told me I could be a scientist. So number one, Elena has had a profound impact on youth here in Alaska. She's trained in the GLOBE program. She's trained more than a third of the schools in the state. One woman, it's pretty amazing. And she's inspired scientists like me to grow up and be scientists that feel engaged in their own communities. So Elena had been co-developing a model for GLOBE, which is Global Learning and Observations to Benefit the Environment. It was one of the early citizen science projects in the United States that was really focused on K-12 engagement in collecting environmental data. So she'd been involved in this for a very long time, and they had started with the idea that it cannot exist outside of cultural norms and practices in Alaska, that to do citizen science well, it needed to start from community-driven priorities. So she was like, I see Twyla here, our work in the Navigating the New Arctic Community Office, where we're trying to advance the community-centered approaches to Arctic science. Twyla, Elena's been doing this since we were babies, where she's trying to advance community-driven priorities and Indigenous knowledge in projects. So in our Arctic and Earth Science project, which preceded this berry project, we follow this learning cycle model that mirrors the seasonal cycle in Indigenous learning frameworks, where you start by listening to elders rather than starting, in our traditional Western science model, start with the question, what's your question? What's your hypothesis? So it starts with listening rather than asking the scientific question. And so we honed in on this idea of story sharing as a key component of citizen science cycle that we could continue to build out in all of the phases of the learning cycle model. And that's where we centered our proposal for this Winterberry project. Elena, come back. Elena had been working on this project called Reaching Arctic Communities Facing Climate Change. And this was an NSF funded project. And it really just emphasized starting with personal stories and community stories in the science process. And they would gather groups of elders and climate scientists together to share stories about climate change. And really, Elena always tells the story of like people wanting elder and youth connections to be a part of the process. We have infused that into our model, and Elena tells this story way better than me. One of the groups that has come through our Arctic and our Science program, which is the NASA funded program that focuses on co-creating projects using GLOBE protocols. These are students from Kwethluk, which is a small village near Bethel in the YK Delta region. And the students had monitored erosion in their community and using GLOBE, and they wanted to share the story at the end of their scientific results using their own cultural ways of sharing information. And so they designed a dance, and they asked Elena was on the phone, and they asked Elena, can we share who we are? And she was like, of course you can share who you are. And she encouraged them to not just share like in a scientific poster form, but to share through story and song. And I wanted to show you their dance real fast because it's particularly powerful. And all right, I think I need to get out.
And Elena is back.
Oh, Elena.
So my power went out, and then I couldn't get back on. So we're on this.
Anything to add, Elena, on the youth from Kwethluk and sharing through story?
Right. It's really, I hope I would never be asked again if they can share who they are. And of course, part of a huge part of their learning and their culture and who they are is storytelling, and that they made this into not only a story, but into a dance that they performed, which was very much appreciated by many people across many countries.
So we just wanted to share a quick clip of the youth sharing. And this is all building toward the motivation toward our study that we were asked to speak about today. So,
losing the land in Alaska, since erosion is very big there, and we're losing most of the villages in the lower Kuskokwim. So this is dedicated to the Yorok, which means Eskimo dance. No na chimnis bin retapot, Kwethluk bin hiskin retapot lu, ayagi he, no na pot not smukta, ayagi he, no na pot not smukta.
So beautiful.
And it also showed the intergenerational, their elder dance with them
Yeah.
as well.
And that was in Ireland, where Elena took them to be a part of the Globe
Learning expedition,
uh,
where students from many countries come and present their investigations and their studies.
And those projects from our Arctic and Earth Science model were co-created projects. I mentioned earlier that they're, in the public participation in scientific research or the community and citizen science spectrum, there's co-created projects where the questions, methods come from the community, and scientists are assistants on the side to help support in whatever way. And then there's contributory projects. And in the Arctic, every type of project has a place. We talk so much about co-creative projects, but contributory projects there's trade-offs in this design spectrum, right? Contributory projects do have a place because the Arctic-wide issues are large, and having standardized protocols across communities has a real benefit for understanding broad-scale change. So we chose a contributory style project for the Arctic Harvest Winterberry citizen science approach. And we asked if we could we supplement it, right? We know that the co-created projects have real benefits, and those students from Queethluck are like the perfect example of students thriving in a co-created model. But in a contributory model, could we supplement it to reduce those trade-offs in learning, in science outcomes, and in the way that kids think about themselves as agents of change? And so in this very first proposal that I wrote that Lisa Rom helped fund, we had two different questions. One was our learning research question about reducing those trade-offs in contributory citizen science projects. And then we had an ecological research question, really looking at the way that the changing timing of the seasons was affecting the fate of berries in the fall and winter seasons in Alaska. And we focused on 4 species that retained their berries. Blueberries and salmon berries, for those of you who have come to Alaska or anywhere really in the Arctic, these are all circumpolar species, or circumboreal in the case of prickly rose and high bush cranberry. The favorite berries are blueberry, salmonberry, cloudberry. But those berries have high sugar content, and they are taken or fall really quickly or rot really quickly. And we wanted to make a project that was accessible to youth groups in the time when they start to gather back for school and for Boys and Girls Club back open and after school programs back open. So we focused on these 4 species. To date, there's over 15,000 berry observations have been submitted through this project. We've had 1,500 volunteers across 30 different communities in Alaska. And just to show spatially the distribution of the communities and the species, you can see that we had a lot of groups come from Fairbanks. All these are youth groups, and they are supported most typically by an after-school club leader or an educator, and often the Indigenous language teachers in their community or Indigenous knowledge holders in their community. And we spanned very different cultural regions, very different ecosystems in Alaska, all with these common berry plants. And we had to adapt to a huge diversity of youth across the state, from urban to rural villages with 80 people that lived in them permanently, to communities like Anchorage, which are highly diverse urban environments with many, many different languages spoken. We documented the types of adaptations that we did to broaden the diversity of participation in this project in a paper that we published in the journal Rural Connection. So if you're interested in how to adapt to maximize the diversity in your programs, that's where you can find that information. To specifically address the trade-offs in design, we focused on 2 supplements to a contributory model. So we the basic citizen science model, where you're like, here's a question that we scientists have, and you volunteers across Alaska can contribute, which is a very common model in citizen science programs. If you go search citizen science programs in America, this is a very common model. And then people submit their results, and maybe they have some interaction. For us, we always do a data jam. We wanted to know the value of personal interactions. So we had a highly supported treatment in our experimental design. And then we had a highly supported treatment plus storytelling embedded throughout the learning cycle model for citizen science. So we can, to understand the effect of storytelling, which is the results I'll share here, we compared this highly supported plus highly supported storytelling models. Elena's motto is relationships, relationships, relationships. So we knew that there was some power in showing up in person to these communities, and not just showing up once, but showing up multiple times. So we actually wanted to test that. For the storytelling based learning model, we embedded storytelling in every part of the cycle. So for those of you who are educators, you may recall the classic 5E model for inquiry learning, which Elena taught me when I was a grad student. And we flipped that to emphasize, so in class standard supported model and basic model, we used the 5E method: engage, explore, explain, extend or apply, and then sharing back your results. And we flipped it to a storytelling based model. And Elena and I will describe in more detail what each steps in that model looked like.
And so we in engaging, it wasn't only the students or the participants, but also the families and the community. And the stories were shared through many media, through by word of mouth, the stories, but also through the felt landscape, so that they can express their stories and their feelings through felt. And so it was a community gathering. We would have berry foods like berry bread, and have the whole community involved, in not just the students. And so they felt like it was owned. The stories and the science was owned by the students and by the community. Next slide. Yeah. And then the adaptations across different settings that Katie had mentioned, because we had rural students and communities involved, as well as urban, like in Fairbanks. And there are different adaptations that we had to do, like the Metlakatla Story Circle at Metlakatla Boys and Girls Club, and then the Story Station at Fairbanks Library. And these were huge gatherings of communities.
We through an IRB approval process, we were able to collect data and student youth and community works samples, and we have archived these in a berry story gallery. And I just wanted to pull up a couple of examples of some community stories of change, and I'll pull that up in a second. But we also had youth in the explore phase of the learning cycle model. The actual science question was framed as a story, and we started it off, acting out through story. They're holding up, what happens to the vole if this timing of the berries changes because spring is getting earlier and the berries are coming earlier now. What happens to the grouse in winter when that happens? What happens to the fox who eats the grouse? And so we actually, you know, had community members and youth acting out the stories. Without a doubt, the Indigenous language of the community was woven in, because the language teachers were often like, hey, this is a great way for us to teach Inupiaq, or this is a great way for us to teach Gwich'in. And so Indigenous language, even though we didn't intend for that to like be an outcome, Indigenous language was just a natural fit that just happened for most of the communities involved. And then for the explain phase, after the students had come and gone out, they visited their berry bushes once a week in the fall. They measured snow using globe in the winter, because that helps explain a lot about the timing of berry phenology, is the snowpack. And then they went back in the spring and checked it again. And they shared their science experience also as a narrative. And we worked with some seasoned educators, both at the high school, secondary level, and early primary level, and informal and formal educators, to develop these storyboards, which we adapted for different age levels. And then they told their narratives as a story, and I'm gonna stop here and just share a couple of the stories that the kids shared, because they're adorable. And let me get, I'm gonna, oh, let me, it's always difficult toggling. Let's see. Gotta hit escape, and then we'll go to our story gallery and I'll share again. All right. So here's an example of some community stories that were shared. This is in St. Paul, which is a little island off of Alaska. And we created these story galleries using 360 cameras. This was an innovation that one of our collaborators, Sarah Stanley, brought for sharing stories. Let's see what here's Miss Brenda's story.
Okay, one of the most memorable berry picking adventures my husband Lewis, my late husband Lewis, and I had was when we were at Kaminista, and we were on the lower level by the water wells picking berries. Then we got this wild idea when we saw the cotton flowers, and you can find them only in that area. And we knew, we were told historically, never go in that field because there's big holes, endless holes. We went anyway, and we picked those cotton flowers. Thankfully, we made it out of that field okay. And then we had an elder that heard that we had gone and did that. We were admonished, and we have never been back there since.
So an example of, we had the prompts were tell your best berry story. This is for the community nights, tell your best berry story. And then we had them rethink the story in a changing climate. Like, would that have changed if the seasons were earlier? Like your situation would have changed. Maybe the cotton wouldn't have, would have not still been blooming and already been gone to seed, or, you get the picture. And then I would like to share some of the youth stories of sharing their experiences. Let's see, this Fairbanks. This is from a watershed charter school. And let's see. Oh, Elena, which one did we like? This cute one.
Yeah. These are bombs.
Okay. Who's in this story?
Me.
Who are you?
This is me. This is May.
Okay. So May and Tara.
You can see the adaptation.
Where did you guys go?
That's another bomb.
There's bombs in this story?
And that's another bomb.
Oh no. What where did you guys go to look at your
That's
berries?
a lava dress. That's me.
Okay.
That's May.
Where'd you go?
We went to feel birch tree.
A birch tree?
Yeah,
Was
right
there
here.
any berries? Oh, there's what's this? When you first
These are berries.
Yeah, what'd you name your plant?
Butterfly shooting star.
Butterfly shooting star. I love it. What did you see on your plant at first when you
There was 12 ripe berries.
Yeah.
Then there was 6 nuts.
The next time when you went out the last time,
There was 6.
which was like how many days ago? A couple of days ago, right?
So you can see, like, everything from kindergartners to grandmas were involved in this project, and the students reflecting on their experience through story was a big part of it. Then in the final phase, we created a lesson based on scenarios, planning methodologies. And we had the kids engage in scenario development. We kept it simple, like the classic scenario development has the 4 different acts, 2 axes and 4 different possible futures. And we narrowed it to 2 possible futures, a do nothing future and a do something future. So we started by having them look at the data that had been collected around the state, it's an awesome opportunity. We use like a space for time kind of substitution. So the kids that live farther south, they're looking at, versus kids that live in a farther north community like Venati. So here we have a north to south progression in comparing rose hip quality on Halloween day. So Venati had very few. Farthest north of Venati is just south of the Brooks Range in Alaska. And then Nenana, which is just north of the Alaska Range, so farther south, and then Anchorage, which is right on the coast in the south. We could see real difference in the quality of the berries. So much higher proportion, the brown here is rotten and the yellow or the red is ripe, much higher proportion of rotten berries the farther south you go. And the more rainier, the rainier it was. And so the kids use those to infer what could happen in the future. If, for example, Venati got warmer and rainier in the future. We also brought in the scenarios network for Arctic and Alaska planning data to look at the actual projections for precipitation and temperature in their community. And then they were able to like compare the communities who monitored the same species. And so we asked them, what were the trends in your data? And then if the berry season starts earlier and the fall is warmer and wetter, what will the future look like? And so here's an example of the do nothing future, and they name their scenario and they sketch out what they're going to do. And 30 years from now, my kiddos will ask me, so we take them through like a visualization exercise where they're imagining, are they going to have a mustache in the future? Are they going to have 10 kids or 3 kids? Or like, what are they going to look like? And then in this future, when we got there, there was only rotten berries left. So they were able to infer from the data that maybe in the future, by the time, if they were picking at the same time, there would be more rotten berries. And then we do a brainstorming of, okay, what ways could we imagine changing that future, right? So like, are there, for the little kids, they were thinking like, let's take care of the berries, we'll water them, or we'll put a little umbrella over them to prevent them from getting rain. And for the older students, they started thinking of things like carbon capture or introducing new cultivars to Alaska. So they came up with an idea and they rewrote their future with the one of the ideas in that future that they could take and run with. And so for this example, this is the same student that wrote the rotten berry story earlier, and they called this one the Berry Good Day. So in 30 years from now, my kids will pick lots of ripe berries. And the strategy that this student had come up with was creating some protected lands. This is the fence around the protected lands so that the snow machines and the 4-wheelers wouldn't run over the berry patches, so they'd have like a community berry preserve. Then we pretend we're NSF, Lisa, and we give them $1 million in sticky notes or stickers. And we're like, okay, if you have $1 million, which priority are you going to invest in? And the students invest their money and prioritize the actions that they want to take, that they have brainstormed. And then, this wasn't an explicit part of the program, but we said, what could you do and what would you want to invest in the short term or the long term? And then in some cases, the youth groups actually took action. We didn't say you have to, we just said, what could you do? And two great examples was the students in Venetai. They noticed, in their scenarios that berries were becoming less predictable, and some years were good, and some years there was like no harvesting at all of certain species, like a berry crop crash. And so they preserved berries and then jarred them and distributed them to the elders so that the elders would have berry jam and jarred berries for the future. So that was pretty cool, like, for resilience planning, like let's preserve so that we can have it in the bad years. Another group, they created their own new berry cultivar patch because they were like, well, maybe different. These were older students, obviously. They were like, well, maybe new cultivars could work in a changing climate, and we could plant honeyberries or Saskatoon or some, other types of berries that might have different flowering times and different fruiting times. And so that was a pretty cool idea too. Elena, do you want to?
Oh, yeah. So one of the things, as part of the scientific process and actually within communities, sharing back the results is very important. And researchers have to remember this too. And so the youth share project results not only within their communities, like the schools or the tribal councils, but they also have the opportunity to present at professional meetings. And this one shows at Alaska Forum for the Environment, where the students from Bethel and the other places presented their projects. And there was also a symposium. And so there were several different levels where they presented to other team members that they haven't met before. And so, lots of opportunities to build relationships among team members.
So just to highlight a couple key findings before we close this, we had questions on whether storytelling would affect different aspects of a citizen science project, a contributory citizen science project. And number one, it did not affect the data quality. Everything is trade-offs in program design. And so the time spent storytelling means that time was taken away from other things. The good news is it didn't take away from the data quality. We did thorough QC on every single data point. And then we did find, though, that it improved the use science self-efficacy and stewardship self-efficacy compared to the students who had just done the standard inquiry model. So they felt more like they could be agents of change. That's what the steward self-efficacy survey items were getting at. And the science self-efficacy, can you be, how do you feel like yourself as a scientist? And from the educator's perspective, we did interviews and qualitative coding of the educator interviews. The educators really valued of this project the sense of being part of something bigger. They also valued connecting the science to their culture and community, and really promoting positive thinking about the future. We have we think a lot about suicide among youth here in Alaska, and we that was in our original conversations. We wanted social and emotional learning and kids feeling like agents of change in their own community. Me growing up in Alaska, I've lost so many of my friends to suicide, and people just feeling like they don't have a role in their community. And so this for me personally was a big motivator of our youth action on climate change. I needed, we all needed something to feel like we were going to make a difference on. And luckily I had Elena Sparrow to whisper it in my ear when I was little. Like, you can be a scientist someday. Yeah. And also just the value to practice. Teachers really appreciated the physical presence of a scientist and mentor to actually do the project. And they thought it was something tangible because climate change can be big, and you start talking about carbon emissions, and like that seems like you can't touch it. But for berries, they were touching the berries, and it made a difference for kids' understanding of climate change. And then in one of our papers, we really looked at whether kids were picturing themselves as agents of change, and in some cases, other people were the agents of change, but in most cases, the youth were picturing themselves through telling the stories of the future. They were picturing themselves as agents of change. So I thought that was good news. And we had a really interesting result that it didn't change across age groups of whether they pictured themselves as an agent of change or not, but it did in rural versus urban. Rural youth were more likely to picture themselves as agents of change than urban youth, which we think might be a function of community size. And we also found that it had a strong impact on retention of groups. 92% of the youth groups, it was a lot of work. They took the kids out every single week to monitor berries. And when it was over, a lot of the educators were like, whoo, that was a lot of work. But 92% continued for a second year in the storytelling group, and 70% for 3 or 4 years. And some, even though we don't have any funding and we can't pay stipends anymore, and we're not really supporting their work in the same way that we did when our funding was full force, some are still monitoring berries. And we're like, wow. And we also started to notice, and this is just a teaser from my grad students' work, Sarah Clement, we started to notice that groups that had come in through our Arctic and Earth Science program, which where the community determines the question before they even come to the training. So these were groups that were already interested in berries, and they came to our workshop, and we were like, well, winterberry is a great match for your question. That there was a difference in the outcomes for the youth of whether it was their question to start with. So we gave that question to my graduate student, and she compared the learning outcomes for the youth in the contributory versus co-created models. So contributory being just came in through winterberry, yeah, we'll be a part of this project, versus we're interested in berries. Oh, and yeah, winterberry is a way for us to investigate our berries. And she found that the youth were more likely to think that the citizen science project was useful for their community if they came in through the co-created method. And also were more likely to mention in their interviews that the understanding of their climate impacts was relevant to their community. And we did really good science too. We published science papers using the berry data. The most interesting result here is that, so you can see the spring fruit loss among these 4 species was just as high as fall fruit loss, which we imagine like animals taking fruits away most often in the fall time. But the spring migration represents a chance for berry genes to go north, which is really important for us in a changing climate. As spring migration happens and birds come back and are taking fruit north with them in their migration routes, we think this is a really hope instilling picture for berry long-term survival in Alaska and adjustment to the changes in climate. And we have a couple of dreams for the future as we seek out more funding to sustain this. Number one is to continue to investigate. We noticed that in wet years, we had more rotten and poor quality berries. And we're digging into whether climate variability, interannual climate variability, that's our next science paper, can explain this. We're also interested in the microbial communities on the surface of the berries now. And the Muscarella lab, Maria Muscarella, a new faculty member here at UAF, is helping to come up with, Elena's also a microbiologist, so she's geeking out on this part. And they're testing the microbial communities on the surfaces of berries, which can have both protective and degrading consequences for the berries. And then we're also moving back to the co-created model for the future of this project. We know that our tribes have diverse questions about berries. And this is just the concerns being expressed in the climate adaptation plans currently in Alaska. And the winterberry question is not suited to answer all of these community-driven questions. So we completed a year of listening sessions to identify people's key concerns for berry quality and quantity in the future, and that's the direction we're heading. So we'll end it there and open it up for some questions.
Thank you, Katie and Elena. That was really interesting and very informative. Anyone have any questions for either Elena or Katie?
Start with a question. I'm wondering if you measured change in the attitudes of you saw change in the attitudes of the student participants. Were you also looking for change in the attitudes of the community members or the elders, or was that any part of what you were able to do?
We focused on the youth and the educators. Our evaluator, though, is diving more into perceptions of the community members. They're going to do it in a case study format, Lisa. They just went up to Venati because Venati was one of our communities that had a lot of community involvement. They were one of the pilot communities in 2017. And we've been married to them ever since. So that and they're interviewing community members to see like what's been the impact of this like long-term engagement in this work. They've joined one thing we're really noticing is like they joined the Berry Project, that community, and then they joined our Fresh Eyes on Ice project, which is a Navigating the New Arctic funded project. And now it's just like, give me more, like, what else can we be a part, so we think that there's this like ripple effect and network effect, right, Elena?
Yeah, and they started with the Arctic and Earth Science project too. So no, like the teacher did.
She came the year after. She started with Winterberry and then came the year after, and it really built up. So like there is an ecosystem effect.
Right. The leveraging of projects.
Yeah.
And actually in the Arctic and Earth Science PD, professional development workshop, we did have change of attitude from the participants, and not only the participants, but the facilitators, us and the other scientists that were involved, on how we all learn from each other in many different ways.
Thank
My
you.
grad students following up on that one too, where some of you may have received her call for survey responses. In our Arctic and Earth Science project, the scientists are changing the way that they're thinking about community engagement, which is a great trend that we're noticing throughout Arctic research. But so that was at a project scale, and she's extended the survey to Arctic scale. And she's looking for responses. I'll send it to you guys, her survey, if you haven't already done it. Medea?
Thank you for the presentation. And it was really fun to see the student drawings and then listening to them describing what they're doing and why are they doing that. My question actually pertains to, it sounded like you were surprised that they keep going, even though there's no more funding and they keep doing this. So I'm wondering if you had a chance to sort of follow up with them and ask what would be helpful for them to have this, like, totally just have a life of its own, basically, after the project is done. How could you support them? Or is there something, if we're trying to incorporate something like this into our future projects, what would you recommend how to plan for that sustainability that happens outside of the project or late, as a continuation?
Elena, you take that. You're the queen of sustaining programs.
So it really is. I guess that is one reason why we are including community members in our projects, is because, as you know, educators come and go, especially in rural schools. And so one of the ways of sustaining it is if the community is interested in the project, and that is among their priority, it will continue in spite of us or beyond what we have to offer them. But it's also a question for funding agencies where it seems like we just have limited time and we think we're done in 3 or 5 years, and we're not actually, because the building of relationships and building capacity in the schools and communities takes much longer time than the usual funding time.
Yeah. Also, yesterday I got a call from St. Paul Environmental Department, and they were like, we're writing this into our EPA monitoring plan, right? And I was like, we're like minimally maintaining it right now because we don't have any funding, and this is it's a plague, I'm sure Twilight, I'm looking around the room, like all of us have encountered this, where it's like, you're funding things on grants and they have that lifespan. But that community was like, we like it, we want it, we don't care what you're doing. And can you meet just to talk about which protocols are going to be the most effective for our questions? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And then archiving the data, this is another, we archive the data that has been collected, but the community ownership of that data, we're definitely shifting more toward we'll help you set it up, use the Indigenous Sentinels network, because that's all about Indigenous data sovereignty, and you'll have exclusive control over that data. So that's kind of the direction that we're heading now, is we'll help you set it up. We've developed all these protocols, let's not waste them. Twyla, what are you thinking?
My question is, I'm wondering, so there's some new research just coming out from Greenland that really demonstrates how the community members, especially in small communities, like communities less than 500 residents, which is many communities around Greenland, most residents in those places will not have education post-elementary because of the challenges with the education system in Greenland. And some of the social science work has really found that people in these places have the most kind of actual life experience connected with climate change, but tend to have the least knowledge of it being human caused and kind of projections of what will happen in some of this. And so I think that there's sort of this new highlight for Greenland focused scientists to think about how to help in a primary education level. And your project just strikes me as the kind of thing that's a great model for how to start to work in that space some successfully with communities. And I'm wondering what you would both suggest as the best web link or paper or other resource for sharing about your project and the framework for it, so that when I share it out to other people, I'm sharing what you think is the best resources to demonstrate what you did, and maybe think of it as a model for copycatting.
Our program description paper is one, but each, in terms of our publications, it's super fragmented because it was an interdisciplinary project. And so each publication just has a little slice and doesn't show the big picture. I would say that the IARPIC talk on the YouTube channel that Meredith showed us might be the best. What do you think, Elena?
Can do.
Yeah, I think so.
And maybe you guys don't need another paper on your list of papers to write, but maybe that sort of meta paper would be a really good paper for a broader community.
Yeah, no, you're right.
I'm right for community, yes, distribution.
Because I know we don't have a couple minutes left, but that's one question that I had is how transferable do you think your overall sort of framework and methodologies could be to places in the lower 48, for example? And that sort of kind of references the idea of a meta paper so that somebody could transfer your model.
Well, some people are using our model already in lower 48 because they do have indigenous communities too. But when we had participants from inner city, they thought that the braiding of knowledge systems works for their African American communities and Latino communities, where they do have knowledge holders from a different knowledge system.
Yeah, that's really interesting because that's not rural, obviously, for most.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think in other places it's easier to implement what we did, especially the in-person, because like we had to fly to these tiny communities on tiny little planes, you know, and do the whole like the remote travel. Maybe not in Greenland, Twyla, like it's probably really similar in Greenland, or you gotta get on a boat. But for the lower 48 United States or connected road system Canada, you know, it's even easier to be like, I'm going to just show up, you know, we're going to show up.
And also I'd like to mention the GLOBE program that has worldwide reach, where they have data archiving available in the monitoring, standardized methods of monitoring that could be used from K-12 and by communities.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's many.
And storytelling is not new. Like, you know, that's
Right.
what our friend and collaborator, Melinda always says, like, you know, this is not new. Remember, it's teaching through story, like in all things is like an ancient practice. It's just for us using it in like what we perceive as the novelty is using it in citizen science programs, which, you know, is not done very often. And you know, to our knowledge, it's one of the first times actually doing a controlled study to like look at the effects of storytelling in citizen science. So yeah.
And I know we're kind of at the top of the hour, so if people are dropping off, thanks for everybody for joining. But if Sarah has a question, maybe if Katie and Elena have another minute or two, you could address Sarah's question.
Totally, Sarah.
Okay, and then we can.
I just want to iterate what you just amplify what you just said. Having grown up and always living in a rural area, this is people that are connected to places know places through stories.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be indigenous. And like the whole center of the Midwestern United States or Western Colorado where I am, and I just think it's really, really important that we remember that this is useful for a lot of places.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And we don't usually in formalized sort of academic settings, we don't stop to think about that sometimes. I think that shows some of the good thinking and innovation that Elena and Katie have done to bring this more to the fore.
Farm kids know how things work.
Yeah.
I grew up on speaking from experience.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And just put a plug in, the Navigating the New York Community Office is hosting a series on storytelling and science with different types of trainings. So keep your eyes out if you're on that list. I know they cross-post with the IARPIC events a lot. So we're excited.
Great. Well, thank you both, Elena and Katie, and thanks for others for attending. Thank you, Meredith, for hosting and Liz for organizing. And we'll look forward to our next meeting, probably summertime sometime, for another interesting collaboration event. Thank you all.
Awesome.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.